Thanks, everybody. Thank you for joining Cervello Inner Circle January. If your January is going anything like mine, I appreciate you fitting it in, because it seems to be busy in the professional services environment all over at the minute, which is good news. So first, before we look at the case study, I want to just go around and do an introduction for everybody. I know everybody knows who they are in the room, hopefully, but when this goes out on LinkedIn and gets shared on social media and on the new Avery Means Business page, we'll share it. We want to make sure that you get a showcase of your business. Let's start with Sharon. Sharon, tell us a bit about you.
I think I'm having the same problems as Ian with the unmute button. So I'm Sharon from Argus Accounting. My passion really is working with small businesses, supporting them in their growth, and not just being there to crunch their numbers and present them with bills, basically. So that's my ambition, to support as many businesses as I can through their growth, support the business owners to realise that dream that they went into business for.
And I said one of the reasons that we're busy at the minute is because our accountancy connections are busy and finding ways that as financial planners we can help. How's your January?
Do you know what? It hasn't been as bad, because a lot of my clients, I've got them organised, we pre-planned everything. My challenge is that where I work with clients that little bit differently, I will gather all their information. I'll then go through that with them before I prepare a tax return, so they really understand how it all hangs together. So that's quite time consuming, because obviously that's on an individual basis. And then when I have got a tax return together, it's sending them the tax return and saying, right, pop some time in my diary, let me talk you through it, understand where your numbers come from and where your numbers go from what you've done to where they go on your tax return, really understand how it all hangs together so that you have a comprehension of what you're then paying, basically, and an understanding. But obviously that's a very bespoke individual service and quite time consuming. Yeah,
100%. But then hopefully it's spread out throughout the year as opposed to just in one place, which is...
We start again in May, basically.
100%. Ian, tell us a little bit about you and your business.
That's twice you've called me out today, Chris. Wasn't expecting
You know
that.
what? You can't see who's on, like, because I can see who's next, can't I? But you can't. You can't see my screen. So sorry.
Yes. So anyway, I'm Ian Brasher. My company is iBray Limited. We are a firm of consultants that help you with your change and compliance needs. Brexit. I'm not going to start on that. But also over the course of the tail end of last year, in my particular area of specialism, everything around data protection, there were some interesting changes. So anyone with a digital business that collects information on children, they've got the children's code starting up now, and we've got until the 1st of September to become compliant with.
So that includes nursery businesses, businesses that are working with.
These are online businesses, so right. Anything that where a child would interact. When my kids were young, we just had the first leak pads coming out, with the little frog and stuff. These days, because you can interact with a child's electronic toy through Alexa, and of course, as child as anyone, particularly from an EU standpoint, under 16, all of our adolescents using Alexa for their educational searches and stuff. It comes right in there. So people developing software need to pay a little bit of attention to that one.
Yeah, okay, great stuff. Thanks, Ian, appreciate that. Mike, talk to me about what's going on in your world at the minute.
Well, we're obviously slightly constrained by lockdown at the moment. Not totally. I can still go out and value if I need to. So I sell businesses for the benefit of people that don't know me. I also value businesses. I think there's a lot of people now going to be looking for a business this year. I think a lot of people are going to come out of lockdown, come out of COVID, and want to change, and I do see a lot of people moving into either lifestyle businesses or bigger businesses. I also see a lot of people that have got businesses are going to see this as a crossroads where they'll either decide to sell the business, or they might be starting to think, well, have I really given this enough thought? Where am I going with the business? And they're going to talk to the likes of you and plan their life strategy for which the business could be a very, very large asset in a bit more detail. So I've spent a bit of time working on my own bespoke business for valuing businesses and telling people how their business is, how much the business is worth, but why it's worth that amount. Because it's just as important to know why it's worth X as it is to know that it's worth X.
I suppose one of the specific points, and I will probably cover this on the case study as well, is how you value businesses in a period of volatility, particularly in the retail space. Because sometimes would the advice be just wait, because at this point in time might not be the best time?
The advice could be wait, but I mean, to a certain extent, as soon as COVID is over, it's kind of almost irrelevant as to the valuation, because you don't value a business on what's happened last year or the year before, even though you might use a multiple of profits, which relate to last year and the year before. You're only valuing it on a multiple of profits because your expectations of continuing, increasing, whatever. Actually, relating to, if you had a minute when I give feedback on the case study, I put together just 2 or 3 little slides just to highlight a differential between a couple of the businesses that you've got on there in a visual way. So
amazing, happy.
Give me a screen share when we're in the case. I'll just show.
You need to ask the governor. Raz, is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, fine. So I've got
permission later on. Give me a screen share and I'll do that.
Yeah, that's fine. Toby, what's going on in your world, mate?
Yeah, just unmuted. For those that don't know me, I think most people know me. Just met Sharon for the first time. Personal business mentor and trainer, basically helping business owners get from where they are to where they want to be and helping them really truncate that journey. It was interesting. I think it was you or somebody else, Chris, that said about people are asking the what now question so much. Last year it was all about charging through, spirit of the blitz. We're going to do this, and their business, making sure their business survived or even thrived. But now a lot of people are coming to me and they're saying, what now? What's next? And that's what I'm helping people with a lot. This how to deal with this as things get back to normal or the new normal. Yeah. And I'm having a lot of deep dive sessions with clients and new clients where just spend 90 minutes, a couple of hours together, just getting really down and dirty in their business and helping them to really understand the areas that they need to focus on to move things forward. And really,
I agree with you. Actually, there was a lot, Toby, last year. Like, head down, I'm going to get through it. Yeah. The longer it goes on, it's like actually I do need to focus on the actions I need to take to do the change. And interestingly, and again, this is in the sort of Haver and Means business group that we run. We're seeing a lot of new businesses start up as well, right? Where people are going through life transition and thinking, here's where we go. So
that's right. That's the other thing you said was about something I'm helping people a lot with, that transition from the corporate world to running their own business. And because a lot of people don't know what they don't know about running a business. Yeah. So that's what I'm supporting people through a lot, making sure that if they don't know what they don't know to ask about it. Because they don't know it exists to ask about it.
I think probably everybody in this room has gone through the experience of going, I'm quite a good technician. Yeah. I know my staff. How does that relate to actually delivering it in a profitable way that sort of grows over the longer term? So yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that over the period of today. Janet, how's life with you?
Oh, afternoon. Yeah, all good. Fairly full on. I sort of feel a bit jealous of Sharon. Sounds much more in control than what we are at the moment. maybe that's the nature of our clients.
Well, part of it's predicated on people giving you the stuff as well, isn't
Yeah,
it? You know,
yeah.
you're always
And to
dependent.
be fair, you know, we start sending out them letters to say, you know, give us some data around about May time, and I'm still chasing for people now, and it's a bit of a challenge. But they tend to be the smaller ones, you know, the little rental people and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, but you know, having said that, it's always a challenge. I think, you know, I really resonate with what somebody was saying about the new clients. I mean, we've onboarded 3 new clients in the last week, you know, with, you know, new limited companies that have made that decision now to start a business.
So that was starting from scratch and going straight to limited companies?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were all PAYE, you know, good high earners, and we decided just to go alone. And you know, there's probably been a trigger on that as well, as far as they're feeling their jobs are not particularly secure. But yeah, I mean, despite the IR35 stuff that's coming in and all that, they're still making that decision. So yeah, so that's interesting, and that takes up a bit of time for us to sort of get all that sorted out, and all the money laundering, and yeah, on top of it's my furlough week as well, because I'm doing all my bloody furloughing. I'm just like,
yeah,
I'm like, got somebody's like, oh well, I've worked 2 hours this week and 1 hour last week, and I'm doing 5 hours next.
Yeah.
Seriously.
You know what? It's this week. It just seems to have got sort of mega. I don't know what's happened. That's like sort of. But we had like sort of 5 new inquiries coming over the weekend. It was like it was working on a Sunday. Clearly,
I find that literally Monday morning. I actually did work the weekend because I was like, because I didn't want to come in Monday morning to all the emails before I started any work. So yeah,
as I said, you know, it's good because you know what it's like. You want to make sure clients are looked after and everything's on track. And even though sort of Hervé and Cassie and Russ helps me organise all that, I just want to make sure that nobody's being let down.
Definitely.
Sharon actually, and we won't share the client story, but Sharon, I emailed Sharon and said, "Is this arranged?" And she went, "Yeah, it's in your diary already," and I didn't know. So I'm on it. I'm just need to make sure that everybody else, and we are. Good. So
good.
I will be taking the day off on Friday just
to
decompress, I think. Great, thanks, Janet. Friday, talk to me about what's going on in your world.
When I can find the mute button. It's all a tiny little button there. It's not easy to get to. Right, for me, it's like a new arena to work in, because the last year, I think people have just managed to survive, feeling a sense of relief. And then just after Christmas, we were on tier 4. So, and I've also found that those who were in furlough last year are finding that they're not been continuing with their employment. So they're looking at new avenues to do things. And, you know, one of the options is obviously going into business to use their skills. Again, like Toby mentioned, that, you know, being in a PAYE situation, 9-to-5 job is totally different to when you start up your business. It's full of opportunities. It looks very sparkly and glitzy in the beginning until you really step into that arena. And then it can be sort of a rabbit in a headlight type of thing. So many opportunities with so many challenges as well. And the biggest issue is the mindset change from a structure that you had where you had the responsibility in a defined role to something totally loose. And that transition process for quite a lot of people is quite a challenge for them. So I'm quite busy with that side of it, where people have been sitting on the fence last year are having to really jump on one side of the fence now.
Yeah, take some action and make some choice. Yeah,
absolutely, yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Pradeep. Really appreciate that. And Steve, what's going on in your world?
Total chaos as always. So thank goodness for some money from my dad at Christmas. So this is keeping me going for
good old dad, eh?
Yeah, further few months without any income, but at least I can last now till June. But it is total chaos. And I understand what Pradeep was saying just now, because I feel like a rabbit in the headlights because I've got so much work on, but I haven't got to the position where I can bill anyone or invoice anyone. You know, I seem to be helping people out left, right, and centre at the moment. I spent an hour and a half with a couple of directors and accountant trying to get out of a franchise agreement, you know, and So I looked at the lease, I looked at the finance, the franchise agreement, and I made it very clear to them, I'm not a lawyer, you know, but I gave them some advice on this. They're very much exposed in so much as they're non-competition, because they want to set up again at the same premises and so forth. But, you know, there's loads of restrictions on this franchise agreement. Right? I'm dealing with, yesterday I spent about an hour of private investigation work, which I found very interesting. I went on the government website and I did a load of research, because there's a woman at one of my networking group that's owed a lot of money, having rented out a premises to someone who'd never paid the rent or whatsoever. And he sort of disappeared, sort of thing. So she gave me a few things to look through. I went on the government website, I went on the bankruptcy register. Eventually, because it was a very common name, eventually I found the address, the old address in Leigh-on-Sea, and managed to find out that he's now done an individual voluntary arrangement. I'm not sure if all of you know what an individual voluntary arrangement is, but his supervisor of that arrangement is based in Manchester. So I gave this woman the phone number, the person's name, and I said, look, you need to be registered as a creditor of that, because it's a proposal. There's likelihood that you will get some money back over a period of time. So she was very thankful, but again, I didn't charge for my time, and I find it so hard.
You know what? It's a really interesting one, isn't it? And I, funny enough, I had a conversation yesterday with somebody who was in a similar sort of situation. So they were, what you've talked about there is for adding value, like straight away, isn't it? And where do you draw that line between the value?
Where to look, the experience that you've had over the many, many years. So you know what you're doing, you know what you know. But I find it hard. Same with the debt collection. I've got a debt collection that I'm working on that's £14,000 that a colleague of mine, ex-colleague of mine, gave it to me. He said, look, it's 3-4 months old. You know, whatever you get, you can have 10, 15% of anything you recover. You know, so I've sent out letters of demand and this and that. So, you know, there's a lot of things bubbling on, but whether I get any income or revenue from it is another matter.
I suppose if you don't, it's a hobby, isn't it? Not a business.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's the danger.
That's the challenge, you know. How do you set it up? Yeah. But it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Okay, and just to give you a bit of an insight, Steve, I'm working. The guys at East London Business Place want to partner with the Havering Means Business Group, and we're just working out the commercials now. But one of the things that they are talking about is launching a mastermind event on the group, where potentially we come and talk a little bit about some of the business challenges we face. So specifically, not networking, but about how we talk about the challenges that we face and just share the expertise in the room. That might be a really good forum, actually, for that sort of challenge.
Yeah,
that's not unique.
No, I mean, more than
we've all gone through that. How much you give away for free, and how much you charge for. Over the years, I've charged for more and give away less, because time's valuable, isn't it? So if you're busy and not charging for it, I'm not convinced you've got the balance right, but you'll get there, I'm sure. Debbie, how are you, mate?
Well, I'll try and stay with you all. It's kicked me off once already, so I missed one or two of your enlightening introductions, for which I apologise. So, but I'm going to give it a go, and hopefully I can stay with you. I'm in Hertford, and the broadband where I am is not great.
Just turn the handle a bit quicker, yeah?
I'll run a bit faster on that hamster wheel. It feels like that sometimes at the moment. It's been really interesting listening to you all. I mean, I'm an IFA, the commercial finance broker, and I've been in practice for getting on for 37, 38 years. And these are interesting times. And I think there's a number of things came up in the opening statements, that value in our proposition. Can our proposition continue to move in straight lines as prescribed by regulators in a model that has gone before when the world is changing? And it feels to me like there's an avalanche going to come down the mountain. And so I'm As a couple of people have mentioned it.
I think change is constant, though, isn't it?
This feels like a big one.
Yeah,
this feels like a big one, and I don't think the ramifications are maybe even fully imagined yet. I was on a call this morning with Nat West, with their chief economist, and you know, that I think was mentioned earlier. There's been 20,000 new businesses set up in December. And so the question for me is, how many of those businesses are new deck chairs on the Titanic, and how many are actually new businesses coming in, and how many of those new businesses coming in are people coming in from PAYE with perhaps very little. Someone mentioned it. They don't know what they don't know, and running any small business it can be a challenging place. We all know that. So part of my proposition is very much mentoring and coaching. I do that in another life for a charity, but bringing that skill, as I've done for the last 30 odd years, bringing it into my client work and trying to help some of these clients with the challenges that they don't even know are coming yet. And one of the things I'm doing...
Demi, can I interrupt 1 second? That 20,000 that you quoted just now, is there any idea of how many are Phoenix companies that literally close down one day and open up again?
Well, this is why I said, the metric was 20,000 new VAT returns were done. Maybe the accountants amongst us can decipher what truth that brings to actually whether that's a good sign for business activity, or whether that somehow is a fudged number, could or could not be useful. It tells me there's activity. Whether it tells me it's all great, I'm not so sure. But I think
it's a difficult one, that one, because you'd assume that you'd need the 85k level of turnover to do the VAT returns, but people can register independently, can't they?
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, great number, but I still don't think the full implications are even here. We've got a new dawn today with what's happening in Washington in the next 2 hours. We've got a massive input now from technology, and which we've never had. These are for me quite exciting times. For many people, they're going to be fearful. And one of the things I do is back to first principles with clients. I really want to get to the heart of them. What are their objectives? Why are they doing something? What are their passions? You know, because when that avalanche comes through the camp, they're going to need to stay focused on getting to the summit. Otherwise, they're just going to be blown away.
Yeah.
And so trying them to imagine the storm that's coming doesn't mean you're going to frighten them off, but at least they'll be a little bit ready. You know, I'm sure that as much as we on here could talk about it, we still won't necessarily be ready for the full impact of what's coming down.
I think one of the things, focus on the end game then helps with your emotional resilience, doesn't it? Because if you know where you're getting to, you can then potentially be a bit more prepared for some of the challenges that we might face. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and we'll talk about that in context of the case study as well. Thanks, Demi. appreciate that, mate. Okay, so just to give a quick overview of the case study. Peter and Charlotte been together for 12 years, 12 and a half, not married, but committed to each other with a 10-year-old daughter. Peter used to be in the military before retraining, set up a business working with ex-military personnel, getting them ready for second careers. It's funded by the MOD and in part by a couple of large commercial sponsors. However, he's concerned that actually his only clients are 3, and if they cut their 3 or 4 entities, and if they cut their funding, he might be in trouble. Contracts are in place, however, to guarantee him to the end of 2021, and it's been, he's been adding value in 2020, but he's worried about that budget, and can he look at diversification in that sector where we can't see another model working. Charlotte had a career in journalism before meeting Peter, left and started a PR marketing agency, built it to a small team, and he's built it up. Net income for Peter was about 85k, but he's working too long. He's not enjoying the experience, and his business is set up with just him owning it and just using subcontractors and people he doesn't employ. And he's wondering whether he needs to take the step across to start employing people. Peter and Charlotte have been wondering about what they decide to do next. Charlotte might sell to another agency and is looking at how we value that. And Peter wonders whether because it is him with a bunch of subcontractors, whether there's a market at all for his business. They've been considering their financial futures and working out whether they've got enough. Peter knows his military pension's valuable, and they feel quite comfortable about the recent pandemic, but as Demi said, that might be down to underestimating what it's going to do. Charlotte has a will, but Peter hasn't. Will was completed sort of a number of years ago. Both consider their businesses lifestyle businesses, but Nick, Peter's friend, runs a bit of a bigger business, enjoys a consultancy business in marketing with 50 staff. But in 2020, it's been really tough with margins getting sort of cut down. He retained cash in the bank, about 280,000, with the business turnover 3.2 million and the margin be about 6%. But the problem is there's a lot of staff and morale's down during lockdown. So he's trying to make sure that people keep motivated. As always, there's probably a bunch of mistakes in there. They're intentional. They're not really. I'll just put that as the disclaimer. So if you're spot on, well done. Thanks for pointing them out. But there will be gaps in terms of what we need to know. That's part of the reason that Inner Circle works, so we can identify and highlight what else we need to know. So I suppose the first question is on Sharon first. What extra questions would you ask Peter, Charlotte and Nick? Before I say that, there is an 80s reference in there that I'm sure somebody will pick up on. Sharon.
So I didn't pick up on your 80s reference. I leave that normally for Ian. He's normally great.
Toby and Mike are normally good at them.
Got it, yeah.
Okay, so I've got a few questions. So start with Peter. What does he do for his clients? What benefit does he bring that they can't get through something like X-Forces or the X-Forces Hub? So that's one question. There's a natural turnover with ex-military clients where there's always people leaving the military. So hopefully he's going to lose some clients, but naturally pick up others. And I'd imagine the lifespan of what he does to them, depending on what he does, is limited. So once his work is done, there is a natural turnover in his clients. What does he do about attracting new clients? I'm happy to take him to an ex-forces meeting with me, but he's got a military connection, so that'll be easy. What does he do to promote his services? So that's a handful there. And then coming on, he's busy. He's spending a lot of time in his business, but what is he actually doing? How does he spend his time? What is he doing? He's outsourcing a lot of his training. Is that costing him? Is that somewhere he could cut costs? Should I go on? There's just so many questions.
Well.
How does he recover his costs? Is he recovering all of his costs? What are his overheads?
Yeah.
So for Charlotte then, does Charlotte offer anything to Peter's clients? Could there be any kind of collaboration there? Just a thought. They're looking possibly to sell, but when? Are we looking in the next few years? What financial records they keep? What reporting do they have in place? And we've had a similar conversation on other clients looking to sell. It's really important that they've got a set of numbers that stack up before they even think about trying to sell. So they've got
what time scale have you got, right? You know, when are we going to achieve that goal? Yeah. Absolutely.
So what are we aiming for? And if they sell, are they looking to outright walk away from the business? Are they happy to stay on in a consultancy situation? Is it a management buyout, or are they looking for buyers? I wouldn't imagine it'd be a management buyout.
And I suppose the other thing is a retiring period. You know, if it is, you know, you need to have a transitional period. Is that going to be 3 years, and is that going to impact what they're going to do?
Absolutely. And then coming on to insurances, it says that Peter hasn't got a will. Well, the first thing I'd do is say, make him do a will, because that's just been proven so crucial. And not just wills, but LPAs.
Yeah.
Very important. Life insurance, mortgage cover, income protection cover.
Yeah.
It's just another can of worms. Yes, it just goes on, doesn't it, Ian?
There's a few gaps in there, isn't there?
Yeah, just a few. Direct costs I've already mentioned, and I think that's me questioned out for the minute, but there's a few to think about.
We'll give you a break, Sharon. You can come back in later. Ian.
Yeah, I mean, there's, as Sharon said, there's pieces all over this, but I think I want to go back to the very beginning with Peter and say, why are you doing what you're doing? Because if he's saying now he's not enjoying it, and that he's spending too much time doing it, I would ask him to go back to why.
But it's interesting that he's stayed in the same sector, isn't it? You know, even though he's outside, he's still trying to support ex-forces do their own thing.
Yeah, and I think,
not at all.
It's nothing to say is a wrong thing to do, but as you said, Chris, there's many ways of doing that. So that's where I would start with him, and then I'd say to him, well, talk to Charlotte, because she's made the jump to expand her business as she has, and get him to explain his own reticence to make that move to Charlotte, because her experience could either give him the impetus to make the move himself, or to say, no, actually, I want to keep as I am, and upon re-examining my why, yes, it is really what I want to do, but I am going to limit my time on it, and if it means I lose 10 grand a year in income, I'm still going to be getting 70 grand plus. It's not a bad job. So that's that. For Charlotte, I think it's, what can she do once Peter decides to carry on to help him? I mean, she's got a platform there that could really accelerate him. And if she's thinking of selling, seeing as Nick is in the picture, what kind of conversation should she have with Nick? Because Nick's not all that enamoured with his own environment either. So Nick could take more of a backseat, have someone like Charlotte in to run it. Is that, talk to each of them. Is that something that is viable, and all that kind of thing. But nevertheless, we've got this issue about the London office. So why is it that it's not being utilised? Using our current climate, is it because making it COVID friendly has made it personally an insensitive place that people don't want to go into anymore? And what can they do about that? Not necessarily get around things, but what can they add to the environment to make it more friendly and keep all of the good risk assessed practices in place.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that, mate. I really appreciate that. I suppose one point is, are Charlotte and names of the case now, Charlotte and Peter's whys aligned, and is their goals the same? Because what happens when Peter does something and then Charlotte's carrying on for 4 years?
Well, in some respects, with an age difference, that may well happen. I mean, it happens quite naturally for a lot of us, where one is older than the other. And when the retirement ages were different, again, it would happen naturally. So personally, I mean, I know that I've probably shot down Buckland here, but I would say that's probably something to be expected, and it's just discussing how to deal with it rather than necessarily aligning them.
Yeah, there's no wrong or right answer on it, but it's just having the conversation to see where it goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. Cheers, Ian. Appreciate that. Mike, do you mind if when we think about the presentations, we'll do that when we do the second element. So let's just talk at the minute about the questions, and then we'll come on to the potential sort of ways you might value. So what else would you want to know?
Well, Nick, I'd want to know everything. I mean, I know very little about Nick, apart from the fact that his business turns over £3.2 million, and it's a bit vulnerable to losing a couple of customers. So it's kind of presumably not really making a great deal out of the £3.2 million. So there's a lot of questions. Really, you know, I'd start with a blank piece of paper for Nick. The only thing I do know is he turns over £3.2 million. So if you've got one business that's turning over £1 million and one that's turning over £3.2 million, if everything else is equal, the one that's turning over £3.2 million will be worth more than the one that's turning over £1 million. So size is everything in terms of valuing a business.
And then that margin, because that margin's tight, isn't it?
You value a business based on profit. However you want to calculate that profit, and there's several ways to do it, which would have a different multiplier to it. The obvious, most common one is EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation, and amortization. So that's kind of net profit after all overheads, equalizing that profit. If your job is actually worth 50 grand and you're drawing out 100, then you put that 50 extra back and just count yourself as 50. So you try and, you know, equalize that profit.
Directors' salaries taken into account, right?
Directors' salaries counted as managers' salaries, or valued as managers' salaries, as opposed to an arbitrary figure. It can go the other way, of course. In the case of Peter, he's doing 1.5 or maybe 2 people's work, and so Peter and Charlotte are a great example of why 2 businesses that are ostensibly making the same amount of profit are probably going to be valued quite differently.
Massively. The time investment back into the business.
Well, just to start off with the fact that Peter's doing 2 people's jobs, so you should add another salary in there, realistically, because nobody wants to buy a business to work, was it 75, 90 hours a week, and do 2 people's jobs. So you know, most people would come into that and hire someone else, and that's going to knock the profit down. So that alone. And I've got another reason, but if I can, I'll show you the other reason later on. Yeah. Because again, I've got to ask them lots more questions. And my final question is, where's Iceman?
see, Google doesn't make this job fun anymore, Mike. Google doesn't make this job fun anymore. I need to find a reference so obscure that Google won't be able to find it. Where am I going to get that from? Genuinely.
I think I probably would have got Charlotte Blackwood. I think I'd have got Charlotte. Okay. Not necessarily without knowing Goose and Maverick, but.
You know what? I've got an amazing one. That I really wanted to use, but it's too obvious, and I need to find a way to like really hide it. So I'll do that. I'll do that next time. So, Toby, just out of interest, you noticed that Mike jumped in with the 80s reference there. He definitely didn't want you to add that, did he?
To it, didn't he?
I
was going,
Toby was going to usurp me, wasn't he?
He was definitely.
I had to get in there first.
I was waiting for both of you to go, right, who's next? Who's going to get this?
Luckily, you didn't quite go alphabetical order, because Toby's one of the few people that would get ahead of me.
Yeah, true.
Mike, you can be my wingman any day.
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, it was Charlotte Blackwood that gave it for me. I thought, that name rings a bell.
and then Google, I'm assuming, told you the rest.
Yeah.
You know what? I was gonna just mention Goose in there, but that would have been too elaborate. So I just kept the name. That would have been anyway.
Yeah.
Instead of indulging on my 80s references, Toby, 2 questions. What questions would you have for the people? Sorry, number 2. How gutted are you that Mike went first? I mean, that was out of order, wasn't
it? Absolutely. Cool. Yeah, I'm interested to know. He views the MOD and the client organisations as being his clients, but I'm interested to know, where does he get these military personnel from? Is he having to market for them himself, or are they being fed to him by these organisations? So what's his marketing towards? What would he want a manager to do? Has he defined the role? Does he have an organisational chart for his business with the job descriptions of all the roles that he's currently fulfilling that he'd be wanting to outsource and delegate? I'd also like to know what he's doing with his 10-hour days, because when you work it out, his hourly rate is not good. It's like 20 quid an hour, 20, maybe up to £25 an hour.
But that's interesting, isn't it? How much are you actually worth? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? If you work out the hours and the income, then actually it goes down quite a lot.
So I'd really like to look at what he's doing with his time, and look at some better self-management of time. What's his, as Ian was saying, what does he really want? What's his vision for his life, his lifestyle, his retirement? What Charlotte's, and as you said, do they match? Do these visions match together? Or if they don't match exactly, can it be worked around? Do they subscribe to the other person's vision at least? And if the business can't run without him, what's the value in it? Obviously, this is more Mike's bag, but what assets does it have? If the business is 100% reliant on him, then that drastically reduces the value. How is their home owned? It's not mentioned at all. Is it jointly? Is it tenants in common? Is it joint tenants? Whether that stands, and as I think Sharon mentioned, wills, LPAs, very important. Similar to Mike, don't know much about Nick at all. Same, what's the vision for himself? What does he want to achieve for himself and his family? What family has he got? We don't know anything about that. He struggled last year, but what government funding has he taken? Has he taken a BBL? Has he taken a C-bill? Has he been furloughing? And in terms of staff morale, what's he been doing about that? Has he been instigating Zoom calls with the staff so they're keeping in touch with each other? Or is it like he's the central point, he's just talking to individual staff? Or are they having joint Zoom calls together? Because I know one of my clients found that incredibly useful while the staff have been at home. And he's even sends them out biscuits in the post to his staff. So they then have a sit down and a coffee and biscuit together on Zoom, which I think is a
nice idea. I like that.
Yeah. That's the questions that I had.
What little touches has he been sort of doing to make sure that everybody's happy? Great, thank you, mate. Really appreciate that. Janet, talk to me a bit about what questions you had.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've obviously covered quite a lot of what we'd all be looking for, but I think, generally I'd be looking for a lot more information on what their financials are. There's very little information on Peter's business, things like his customer sales ratio, what portion is going to what customer. And then, I think, again, what Toby's just said about, it's an owner managed business. Is there a business without him? So I think maybe run some scenarios to say, if you employed someone to do this job, this is where your results would be, and, so forth like that. So he could see, if he actually put together a business that was sellable, where his profits would then go. So I think that's what I would be looking at.
But I mean, I think I mentioned this previously on this, and so building a business to sell, even if you don't plan to sell, is not a bad strategy.
No, definitely not. Because otherwise, what have you got if it is, as in the case with a lot of these sort of sole consultant businesses, without the sole consultant, where is the business? So, I think you've got to work towards that aim to have something that's sellable. Otherwise, you're always going to be working in it. And so that would be that. I'd bring up the probably slightly delicate situation of them not being married for sort of inheritance tax sort of issues, and is that something they've considered? Because there are implications for that. Maybe they might want to reconsider their position on that.
You know what? It's interesting. A lot of the work I'm doing is in that space. And there's a case that I'm helping somebody with. We had the initial conversation today. Just want to highlight it, just so there's two actually. We're supporting somebody whose mum unfortunately passed away that I'm guiding through a process, and because mum and dad were married, and dad died a few years ago, but they hadn't used his nil rate band.
Exactly.
We brought that forward.
Yeah.
And the saving was about 110k in inheritance tax.
Yeah, it's valuable.
Makes a massive impact.
Yeah, exactly. So if nothing else, two of them need to go and get married. And
getting married for tax. I mean, what's happened to romance, Janet? What's happened to romance?
Romance. Who needs romance? We're talking tax. Come on.
But the other one that I'm dealing with at the minute, and the one that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, is a lady who where a trust owns half of the money, and the lady's living in the property.
Okay.
That creates a challenge because the she's not paying rent to the trust.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, that would be, why not? Why not just pay commercial rent to the trust and
So
overcome that?
For those who don't know, that's a gift with reservation, and that means that that asset will be included as part of the inheritance tax calculation. But it's stuff like this that people don't take into account, isn't it? It's interesting. So, anyway, definitely. They're getting professional. So that's all good.
Good.
Okay. Getting back, how would you ask that question?
I've asked that question and it was a little uncomfortable, to be honest, because there was like a couple that had been together for like 25 years and I was like, why are you not getting married? And he obviously didn't want to. So it was a little bit, and they both spoke to me after one of them had left the room to sort of go, I really wish I hadn't asked after that. I was like, okay, that's fine, you know. As long as you
By the way, for tax purposes only,
exactly.
you do your own thing.
But they can lead a horse to water.
Next time I've got to ask that question, I might have to give you a call and get you to do it.
Not good at all. Okay, so Charlotte similarly haven't really got the understanding of her business, you know, what are her overhead, stuff like that. And then the thing that sort of jumped out of me was this Mike, who only owns 15% of the shares. You know, was he interested in purchasing the remainder up to 50% and taking a more sort of prominent role in the business? So he seemed a bit of a strange one.
Again, this might be one for both Sharon, actually for everybody. I've had a call from a client last week who's been offered an element of a business that's going into an EOT, Employee Ownership Trust. They seem to be increasing in popularity at the minute, right? Are you seeing that?
I haven't seen that, but I think there are things that are being considered with, you know, sort of different alternative arrangements being sort of thought about. People being a bit more creative about how they sort of structure things to make it more attractive. But yeah, I haven't come across it. I don't know. Sharon, have you? No.
It's not one of yours. Yeah.
No, just you.
I've come across minority shareholdings quite a lot. And of course, you would discount that 15% quite considerably relative to 15% of the open market value of the whole company.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, great stuff. Friday, talk to me about what questions you'd ask.
Right. I feel a little bit at an advantage here because I've had dealing with 5 high-ranking officers from the forces, veterans, if you want to call it. Now, I'm just looking at Peter, his training and background. Now, obviously, we don't know when he actually left. What was it, an officer level, high ranking? But it begs the question because he had to go through retraining. Now, as far as forces are concerned, they have robust military leadership training, which means that when you set up a business, you bring that skills with you. So it begs the question about Peter's ranking. Where was he? It's the same thing with Nick. Now, it gives me a clear picture about how they've been running the business. If they had to retrain, that means they had to change the mindset. Earlier, we talked about transitioning from 9 to 5 to something. Now, it's unique from forces to being self-employed. The people I've had their brigadier levels and commanding officers, and they've done exceptionally well because they've used the military leadership training to run successful businesses. So, I mean, it's not a loss. Peter can still do things, but one thing I'd ask is, when did he actually leave the forces and retrain? That's not very clear. If that has been a substantially long time ago, he's been struggling by the looks of it. You know, the businesses haven't been successful. He's not running it as a business. He's running it as something that he thinks is a business.
But more of a hobby, right?
It's like Toby was asking, where is he getting his recruit from? That's a no-brainer. It's coming from the lower ranking officers or privates or, you know, whatever the field forces are. And the way to get them is clearly through the MOD, because the MOD are pinpointing, saying these are the guys who are leaving the forces. Now, these people are at a disadvantage because they're used to following orders, which means when you try and retrain them, they will not learn to do things for themselves, decision-making. They have to follow leaders. So same thing could apply to Peter as well as Nick. They are followers, they are not leaders. So in a business, you have to lead yourself. You are the leader in your business.
Do you think there's enough information in the case study to tell us either way? Because I didn't think so.
No, there isn't. There's a lot of gaps in here. The fact that they're actually aged at that particular level, they could have left a long time ago. 12 years is the only indication we've got when Peter and Charlotte met, but that could have been after his military service or during the military service.
Right, Sharon, I think, and again, you guys are going to have a bit more experience than me. What unique challenges do you find with working with people? Because I know, Sharon, you're affiliated to Forces work. So help me understand a little bit about what unique challenges that might bring.
So the big thing you find that when the guys or the girls, as it were, come out the forces, it's a bit of a culture shock for them because they're programmed effectively.
Institutionalized, right?
It really is institutionalized, and that is a real challenge for them. And stepping out of that, depending on how long they've been in the forces, you find the longer they've been in the forces, the worse the issue is. And almost integrate them back into the real world is sometimes quite a challenge for them. And they face challenges not just on the business front, but on the personal front as well, because they've got families. Remember, this could be the first time they're actually spending in many years substantial times with their families. So it's a general challenge, and they just need a lot of support.
Particularly recently.
Even more so.
Yeah, a lot of these veterans who are with a longer service are actually under the radar because they don't like to admit they've been in the forces. Yes. Even though they've been highly trained, and MOD puts a lot of money into training these, into engineers, logistics specialists, and these kind of things can actually be used. But they need to change the mindset, and that's what it is retraining the mindset to apply themselves. I've spoken to quite a few councils who find that it's difficult to reach the veterans. The only time they surface or come onto the radar is through social services or in the A&E. And that's a sad thing. And it's like Sharon mentioned that, they were used to being in the barracks where everything is taken care of. When they come out, they need to able to manage their money and all the logistics of banking, paying bills, and all this kind of stuff.
I suppose there's a asking for help issue sometimes as well, isn't
Very
it?
much so. After that Rigby incident where, he was attacked in his full army regalia, the MOD have actually discouraged people who are in civilian environment to wear civilian clothes, not army clothes. That's why they're partly scared in that sense to admit that they have been in the forces. There is also an issue of discrimination with employers because they view these veterans as killing machines. They don't want killing machines in their work environment. So there is a discrimination there. So employability is very difficult. The place where they end up usually is in the security guards environment. And that's not necessarily action-based. They're like action men. These kind of very solitary, lonely places to be. It's a bit like a sentry duty for them. And I'm sure a lot of the soldiers...
Sharon, Sharon, you had a comment on that.
Ex-Forces is working very, very hard to try and integrate that and try and find space. So I was talking to a young man a couple of nights ago who's just coming out of the forces. He's coming out next year, and he really has no idea what he's going to do with his life. He needs inspiration as to what business to start. At the moment, his idea is that he's going to start an e-commerce business, buy gold and sell it more expensive than he buys it. Well, okay, that's great. Might need a bit more.
Oh, the hairs on the back of my arm just stood up. Literally.
Of gold.
Well, you know what? It's interesting you mentioned that because we get clients who say talk about gold, and speculation isn't investing, is it? You need to be clear about the two. Absolutely. Anyway, sorry.
And the part is that even in the military and within Army, Navy, within the forces, they're not advertising what's available training-wise and cross-training-wise sufficiently to these guys. And there is a lot of training available. This guy had no idea. And we as a group of ex-military and civilians, effectively, were telling him, you can go back and you can get training on this.
Signposting. Yeah.
They just don't push it, and they really need to.
Yeah, no, it's an important issue. It's an important issue. Steve, what were your thoughts in terms of questions you'd ask?
I had to, I don't know if you, I had to take a business call earlier, so I wasn't listening to a lot of the comments that other people were making. So whatever I'm going to say, it may have already been discussed or repeated it. So I rushed through it late last night when I received it. But obviously the will is an important part, because it appears that the will was prepared and signed off even, you know, a few years before Holly was even born. So, you know, it has to be reassessed, that will. And obviously Peter will need to have that looked at as well. It's important to establish, obviously, what Charlotte and Peter's plans are for the future about marriage and things like that. There's a 15% shareholder in a guy called Mike in Charlotte's business as well. Again, it depends on what Charlotte's views are and what she's looking for the future, but there may be something that bring Mike in and maybe offer him a more of an incentive if the business is doing reasonably well to increase that share offer of 15%. Private medical insurance, I don't think that's necessarily been mentioned. You know, I think there's a lot of things that, you know, yeah, of course. There's so powers of attorney. I'm sure you've discussed that before as well. But yeah, there's not more, a lot more I can add. But there are a lot of gaps here that you know, I would want to question.
One really important issue that hasn't been flagged yet is when Janet's had the conversation with them about getting married,
yes,
and they get married, the fact that she's got a will doesn't matter; it will be revoked.
Yeah.
So actually, they certainly need to focus on getting that will done, don't they?
Yeah.
After they get married.
Absolutely. I've got to. Well, as I said, Holly is only 10 years old, so you know she's got to be involved in it somewhere along the line.
You know what's weird? We did our. I don't know what everybody else's personal experience is with this, but Cassie and I did our wills and power of attorneys a few years ago now. The hardest part wasn't the money; it was who would we. I'm doing all right, but it wasn't the money. It was who would we trust to care for the kids?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to put that obligation on your mum and dad, you know, because they're older. You know, how do you get to a point where you make that decision? So, go on, Toby.
Sell them.
I think the older one might have some value now, but I don't know. It depends on how the younger one gets on with our homeschooling. Debbie, talk to me about what questions you'd ask.
Yeah, there's been a lot brought up that I agree with. There's some detail there clearly in each of our specialist areas that we would want to know. But just bringing it back firstly to Peter, I would want to know a bit more about what makes him tick. He's been in an institution. People have commented on that. The institution overlays, breaks down the people, then builds them back up. But what is his underlying passion? Why did he set up the business? And is there a business plan? Has he even written one? Getting money from the MOD by way of some sort of contract, there's no detail around how that looks. So has he just got a lump of money coming in each year, which he's trying hard to spend in terms of costs of business and his salary? Is it actually a business? Is it just a continuation of the military giving him something and him responding to it?
There could be an element of him still being dependent on that military income, just in a different setup, couldn't?
Exactly, but I've got experience too with ex-military people from all levels, and you know there is always the human being under that. And some people, for example, will take full advantage of the retraining that's available when they're inside. Others miss that boat. There's also obviously a lack of confidence and a lack of sometimes living in a different environment, which is the commercial world. So I'd really want to get to know him and see where he's going and what his business plan was and throw some early questions in, which obviously he's not necessarily going to know the answer to. What was his exit strategy? All things he may not have given any thought to. And it may well be that, you know, he's a trained scuba diver, and actually he could earn more by doing some instructing and setting up a scuba club than running with this military contract that's actually not bringing him to life. And he's not.
But he might love it as well, Deb. Do you know what I mean? He might just say, I'm doing 50 hours a week and earning 30 grand a year, but I'm actually having a life. So
finding out what makes him tick would be what I would be sort of wanting to do. I think from Nick's point of view as well, you know, he's ex-military. What I would be asking Nick, I haven't touched too much on Charlotte. She seems to be quite on top of her situation, and there's all the standard things from a financial planning point of view that the business is reliant on her. So you've got shareholder protection, you know, key person, all those things, and that would come out. If you jump to Nick's situation, I'd want to ask him how he is coping with lockdown. Because was he running a business before that? What was the ethos of the practice, the business? What was the morale like before? It was all based on being in London, all being in. But we're moving into a world where things are going to change. Not everyone's going to have to go in. How's he coping with it? And that might give some clues as to how he might want to think of himself, and then give some support, moral support, as it's being called here, in the, you know, to his team. But I think he needs to start with himself, just reading between the lines. Yeah. So there's a couple of things there that I think are a bit different to what other people have said, or touching on what other people have said, but agreed with what everyone else has put forward. You know, they're all things that we need to know.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think to pretend that it's just our teams that have struggled with this and not us at times is a fallacy, because trying to cope with this is interesting. Funny enough, somebody Toby and I know pretty well, who I had a conversation with last week. We spent 20 minutes of that conversation talking about where we're going to go for our first lunch, which I'm really looking forward to. Okay, great.
Chris, can I just raise a point there? Is it just me, or is everyone getting a bit spooked when they see crowds on telly at football matches and restaurants, and you think, oh, we used to be like that? It seems I can't wait for it, but it seems really strange when you actually see normal life.
I mean, it'd be interesting how quickly we go back. You know, I think there's going to be a transition. Certainly, clients that I've got in the setting, friends of mine who work in town, they've got really no intention of going back full time. I think it's going to be a bit of a sort of a balance, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Sharon, I tell you one thing. And again, it'd be interesting to get everybody's thoughts on this. I'm more efficient work-wise working from home, but I'm enjoying it a little less. So yeah, I'll get that balance right back eventually. Sharon, talk to me about what you'd recommend these guys do.
So I'd recommend they get their financial stuff in order. I'd certainly take a look at the business where we've got 6% profit, gross profit, because something there, what on earth are their direct costs? What are they classifying as direct costs? I hate to think.
I mean, city rent, it will be an issue, won't it? Potentially.
Yeah, but that's not a direct cost effectively. That shouldn't be hitting their gross margin.
Yeah, gotcha.
Then what are their overheads? So I work with a business who, when I started working with them, they said we make 20% profit on every piece we make. So that sounds good. He says, the problem is I don't know where the money goes. Okay. So you're making 20% on every piece, but what you've not taken into account is your overheads.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're now in a loss position. So the money's not going anywhere. You've only taken into account your direct costs, your overheads, what it takes to get your ship afloat.
To run the business. Yeah.
So I went back and calculated from an hourly rate of what it takes to open his doors each day before he sells anything, just to get everything ticking. And that's all of a sudden he discovers where his profit is. And then And it's also where they spend money. So are you spending a load of money on stationery? So stationery has really been a historical issue, and it's still a bit of an issue, because if you're storing your profit in your stationery cupboard, well, I hate to tell you, but it's not going to do you any good there. And if you store things like Tipp-Pick in your stationery cupboard for long enough, they end up in the bin. So you're now just popping your profit in the bin. Just think about where you spend your money.
Yeah, 100%. And have an understanding of that cost of sales, cost of production, and fixed costs and cost in the two. Because that's not a 20% margin, is it?
Absolutely.
Just out of interest, what was the margin in the end? Was it lower than the...
Well, they put their prices up, haven't they? Because they weren't covering their overheads.
Yeah, gotcha.
So they've now put their prices up. Their gross margin now is roughly 55%, which is much better. And they're covering their overheads, and they're a business that are doing well, and just eking their prices up. So now's obviously not the best time to start putting your prices up. But, you know, if you just creep up little bit, and when you re-quote for new work, make sure you take that into account.
You know what's interesting though, and again, open conversation, and my experience is that, and again, we've had the conversation about cost and value. My experience is a lot of concerns about charging are internal as opposed to external a lot of the time. You know, people say, I can't charge that. Well, actually, if you're valuing your time a bit more and the value you add, then actually you do, and people are quite happy to pay. But if you've been charging X amount for so long, you get mentally stuck, don't you, at a cost?
Yeah.
It's also whether your clients are price sensitive or you perceive them to be price sensitive. There's a perception issue here. But if you're providing value to a client, then they may not be price sensitive. People who are price sensitive are obviously often complaining about the service and not the price. If they were getting the service, you don't mind paying that little bit.
Yeah, it's value add, isn't it? Where's the value coming from?
Is that value add?
Amazing. Thanks, Sharon. I really appreciate that. So increase your price is the tip. Yeah, worth doing. Worth doing. You know what? There's a guy who works in our space, in financial planning space. He's got this amazing little sort of one-liner about price. He went, if you double your price and lose less than half your clients, you're in a better place financially. It's really, yeah, I like it. Really good.
And it's also making sure that your clients are paying you. So working with the digital marketing guy, and they said, oh, we've got a great client, absolutely amazing. It's Aston Martin. And I think I've mentioned this before. And having an Aston Martin is a great kudos client. But if they don't pay you, they're not a client worth having. It's just costing you money.
So it's interesting because we've had that experience as well as Cervello. We helped a number of, back in 2012 now, we helped a couple of, I'm not going to mention their names, but large fashion retailers through automatic enrolment, like getting them ready for the pension stuff. And fees were good. They were on a retainer. You know, actually we were getting a lot of value. They took their time paying, Sharon. They took like it was like sort of 30-day terms, and 90 days we were still following up. And actually, there is an element of large corporates doing that, isn't there?
Absolutely. And it's a big thing to be aware of when you take into account your debtor days.
Yeah.
So how long does it take from when you send out an invoice for it to materialize as cash in your bank?
And do you know? Are you keeping track of that?
Many businesses don't. For me, it's a crucial KPI for many, many businesses. Yeah. Do you know how long it turns for cash to end up in your bank? And many businesses don't know that. It's something to think about.
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Mike, I'm going to allow you to share your screen. Give me 2 seconds. Oh, right. So I made you host, didn't I? So you should be able to do that now.
Yeah, I've done it.
Are we there now? Oh,
yeah.
Yes. Let's have a look. That should be that one. You can see that. This is, I just done some of this morning in anticipation of the of the meeting today. So when we value a business, let me just go from the beginning. Here we are. So when we value a business, we typically value it as a multiple of profits. And was just playing around with numbers. And I think in terms of Charlotte's business, my view, chances are it's going to fall in the range of 3 to 3.5 times EBITDA, that sort of figure. It could be higher, it could be 4, it could be 5. Lots more questions to ask, which I'll come back to. But we looked at, you know, people bandy numbers around when they talk about valuing businesses, and people say 3 to 5 years, and they just pluck figures out the air. And if you pluck a figure out the air, it's my point is it's absolutely useless. If you looked at Peter's business and Charlotte's business, they're making the same amount of profit. Actually, there's going to be quite a big disparity. And some of the reasons that there would be a disparity, we've already come across. When I'm valuing a business, I ask loads of questions, and I produce what I call a prescience score, which is a score that tells you where that business is on a scale of 0. In fact, no, I've never had anything below 20 and 100. And again, I've had nothing above 90 odd. And that score then I convert, depending on the size of the business, into a valuation which would be in a range. So 3 to 3.5 times would be typical. In order to get to that prescience score, I have what I call the 7 pillars of business valuation. Some of these we've already touched on. The core one right in the middle is financial performance, so a multiple of profits. But other elements of financial performance, are the profits static? Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? What is the gross margin? Is it a high gross margin or a low gross margin? If it's a high gross margin, then scaling it could go off the scale in terms of profitability. If it's a low gross profit margin, then you're going to work really, really hard to increase your profit relative to your turnover.
Right, can I ask a quick question on that? You've got the pillar of financial performance there, which makes perfect sense. The valuation might be based on profit. Do you find the other pillars have an impact on multiple?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. You've talked about cash flow there. So if typically you're a business that generates cash as you scale, then you're going to be far more valuable than the business that sucks cash in. I had a client who was an importer, and you talk about people not paying quickly, but not only did the client, one of their main clients, pay in 90 days, but it was on the water for 60 days. They had to pay a deposit 60 days before it went on the water to China. So, to double their turnover, they would need to kind of triple their borrowing, and it just sucked cash in.
It's that upfront investment it takes to get the returns, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Growth potential has another, is it actually scalable, or have you reached the ceiling in your particular market? Business dependence, so are you dependent upon one customer? And clearly Peter is dependent upon a small number of customers. He's also dependent upon his suppliers, because his suppliers comes from the MOD or comes from the military. We don't exactly know how that works, but would that actually move with Peter? Is that a personal relationship that is driving his business there? And again, management I've got here, which is I'm that final one on the right hand side is saying, is that a business with a team, or is that just a lifestyle business with an owner like Peter who's working 75 hours a week, or like Charlotte, who's got a little team in there? Can she go on holiday? Can the business owner go on holiday for 3 months? And if they come back after 3 months, is the business still there? Well, Peter, I suggest you probably no. Charlotte, I suggest you probably yes. It's going to make a huge difference. So, the £85,000 profit, actually, I suspect if Peter's business is even sellable, it would be sellable at probably no more than 1 time's profit, £100,000. He'd probably take that for someone else to come in, learn the ropes. That's assuming they think they can take it on. Whereas Charlotte, if she can sell it to somebody who is a strategic purchaser rather than a financial purchaser, she could get 5 times profits there. Yeah. If somebody approaches her, then the number could go up again.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because let me understand. So that sort of with Peter, I suppose one of the things is he's got the contracts with the MOD or whatever it may be, and the commercial sponsors. But the fact that he hasn't got the structure around it means that it could go tomorrow. Would there be a goodwill element in the contracts that would be included in the valuation?
Well, 90% of the valuation of a going concern business is goodwill. The assets are normally a relatively small part of it, particularly in a service company. Yeah, there would be, but of course these contracts are finite, aren't they?
They're going to stop.
You mentioned that they're going to start to run off. So I would rather have a value proposition. Is there a genuine reason his customers come to him? Is there a genuine reason? Has he actually got something that's a USP within his business that other people haven't got? If he hasn't, and he's just got contracts, then when they run off, that goodwill is very, very little.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, thank you so much for that.
Okay, you're welcome. Any questions? I'll stop sharing.
Can you do me a favour, Mike? And I'm happy for us to send it out as part of the pack we do at the end. Would you be happy just sharing that screenshot?
Would you like me to upload a PDF into the chat, and you can do that?
Yeah, Raz, can you pick up the PDF in the chat and we can share that with everybody?
Yeah, I'll make sure.
Because that's really useful.
Yeah, I'll make sure that's done.
All right, I'll stop sharing. Cheers. Thanks,
Mike. Yeah, really good. Toby, what would you recommend that these guys do?
So I'll just get my notes up. Yeah, as a couple of people have mentioned, Will's LPAs need to be looked at really rapidly. And then I'd want to sit down with them and work through business plans with them. See if they've got business plans. I suspect, particularly maybe in Peter's case, there's no business plan. And just work through a simple business plan. Where are they going? What's their vision? What do they want to achieve for themselves? Why they see people are attracted to them and to their business? What they want to achieve in the year ahead, the milestones along the way. A SWOT analysis has got to be essential for these guys. And I think they need, particularly Peter needs some help with systems and processes. So a good systems and processes guy or gal, I think it would be really, really valuable to him.
Well, I suppose the timescale Peter's got is that the challenge Peter's got is his timescales are short because he's got this contract potentially running out, and a lot of this work needs to be done urgently, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big urgency there for him.
Right, thanks, Toby. Really appreciate that. Janet, talk to me about what you'd do.
I think, what we've covered before, we obviously need additional information on their financials because, we've got a very sort of small snapshot there. So once you've got that additional information, then I'd run a few scenarios on all three of them and just sort of see, if we do this is what this could happen. And if we do this could happen. So I think that's the sort of angle I would go down to see, then they can make an informed decision, if they're going to bring change the structure of their business, or if they're going to sell off the business, then these are the results that you could expect to happen. So I think that's what I'd be looking at. It was a bit, going back to sort of Nick, the figures that stated there, the profit margin didn't stack up for me. If the payroll was his direct costs, you still wouldn't end up with a 6% profit margin on it. So again, look at his numbers and see where, what would happen if we tweak around with them and the sort of end result that he could potentially achieve. If he gives up the office, what else would he have to spend money on? And if he retains the office, what could he do to make that more of an attractive place? So I think it would, for me, it would just be to running all them through and see the outcomes of that.
Yeah. And how would you scenario test? What would you use to do that?
So if I was looking at Peter, for example, I would set his as it is. This is the actual situation. So we've got a set of actuals. We know where he sits with that. And then we'd maybe change that and say, okay, now if we bring in a manager, this is the salary. Let's put that in. This is effect on that. This is what you're now going to expect your revised profits to be. However, you might increase your sales because this manager is going to increase your sales. So we've got another scenario there. So yeah, I think it would be just building on that. I mean, as far as Charlotte, you know, I would look at, you know, okay, the scenario is that she sells off some more of the business to Mike. You know, what's our position then as far as her input? And then look at maybe she comes out of it completely, or she increases her sales to bring in some of Peter's work as well. So I think it would be running all them through to see what bottom lines, you know, you'd end up with.
And I suppose the other thing, this is one for Sharon as well. Our business is at the minute going through a process of renegotiation in terms of cost, because that's the other element, isn't it? You know, as 2020, 2021 shown us that we might not need that big London office, or we, you know, thoughts on.
Yeah, I think definitely that's the case. You know, people are looking at where they are, but you know, I have said to people, I think, you know, don't be too quick to make a decision now when we're in this sort of situation. You know, I did have a guy who, you know, is literally, oh, you know, I've started to sell, I've had enough, and all that. You know, maybe just give it a month and see where we are, you know, in a month's time, because is this the time to be making such sort of groundbreaking decisions? And I think the same goes along the lines with the sort of office space and stuff. Maybe you won't need the same level, but maybe you will still want a place to be, you know, operating from.
Yeah, so, is that? But it's interesting, isn't it? Because so we and again, not in the same space. This guy is not a business owner. We've got a client at the minute who we're doing some work with, and he's got some big decisions to make with his pensions.
Right.
And last week he phoned me and said, "Right, I've decided I'm doing this." I said, "Okay, help me understand why you've decided today." He went, "I'm just sick of everything. I've had a really bad day." I went, "We're not doing it today. We'll do it when your frame of mind is going to be in a position where you can make a less emotional choice."
Exactly.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because sort of,
I think it can be very emotional.
I can go, right, okay, we need to do that.
Yeah, and similarly, I had a guy who's, you know, just split up with his partner, and he's just like, oh, I've had enough, I just want to get rid of it all, you know. And it's like, this is not the time to make this decision. You know, you need to be in the right state of mind, as well as you know,
particularly if you've built a business and a decent business for a period of years, throwing it all in on a bad week is interesting. But great stuff. Thank you. Pradeep, what would you recommend?
Right, recommend. I'd like to go back to when they actually left the forces, because that's key, because they would have started their journey there, deciding on their knowledge at the time and their aspirations at the time. Now, a lot of time has gone by, and a lot of things will have happened, things that have worked, things that haven't worked. So their question of what next is very crucial to understand their past journey. And then project, they're at an age where they should be looking at the next 5 years to 10 years to see what that next looks like. And based on their skills and experiences they've gained over the business operations they've had so far, what can they do to ensure that they're successful in what they're doing. Sorry, I can't hear you, Chris.
I suppose the other point is, has your goals and aspirations changed over time, right? Because like that account, like sort of, certainly one of the things that I mentioned on the webinar we ran earlier in the week is, you know, with our clients, you know, we might have worked with them 7 years ago when their goals were X. They've had experience of 7 years more to decide what they want to do, and their goals and aspirations might have changed. So did the guys in the case study get real passion out of their business, and now have they changed? And how do you navigate that, Prado?
I think partly is to see what they're doing now, because they could have jumped onto a hamster wheel and they're thinking that, you know, they're doing a wonderful job, they're running a business, but not realizing that, you know, they're not very productive. And it's a habitual thing, because if you change from one thing to another, either you do a conscious decision-making of how to change things, or you go into a default setting, you get into habits of things. And for them, they've created a lifestyle which may not be what they were actually anticipating or vision at that time. So now is the time to review, to see how things have worked out, what has worked and what hasn't, and then revisit about their aspirations. Their aspirations, like you said, Chris, will have changed now, because now they've grown up. They've got more experience of taking the knocks in businesses and also the big wide world out there. To have very little commercial experience is quite a disadvantage, because if they've been relying on MOD for so long, then they need to get out of that mindset and say, how can they do the retraining themselves? And if MOD has just been in cannon fodder for them to feed them with so many ex-veterans, then they need to revisit and see where can they actually use their skills they've gained over these years, and how can they be more productive and profitable in their business. Amazing. And they're not far off from what you call a later life. And I think they need to start thinking seriously now, rather than keep running on the hamster wheel and then suddenly fall off and then find that they've lost a lot of time.
But then I suppose the other thing is retirement the aspiration? Because when we did our research last year for the white paper, 50% of people said to us, look, that old style gold watch sail into the sunset is not what I want to do.
Oh, absolutely. I think the word retirement is obsolete now. This belongs to the confines of our ancestors, I'd call it, really. Because
our research said that 50% still wanted to do that, but 50% didn't. So yeah, it's getting there, isn't it? The change in mood is certainly there.
It is. Well, what's actually happened over the last 12 months is that it's shaken people's comfort zones in terms of how they used to business or how they used to live. And when you're in a straitjacket, the only thing you can do is, how can you get out of this? And I think that's what has put all of us into a straitjacket. And then we have to revisit and thinking, how can I change so I can actually embrace the uncertainty coming forward?
So that's raises an interesting point, and it sort of highlights the thing that Janet spoke about. How do you make sure that people are in the right frame of mind, for want of a better phrase, to make important decisions?
Right. For me, it's natural, because I take them away from the noise. The noise is in their head and in their doing, because when they're busy, they haven't got time to think for themselves or what is important to them. So we take them into a quiet space, and this is really where they're comfortable and not in a familiar environment. I mean, at the moment, okay, it's difficult to take them out of familiar environment, but hopefully when we are able to come out, because remember, these guys are forces, they've been outdoors and they're functioning outdoors. So for these people, actually, it would be no-brainer to get them outside and then think through what is important, and be honest about it and drill deeply about what hurts them, what is their pains, what are the joys in their life, and building on that. These are your fundamental building blocks of how you create your aspirations and you make it successful. And,
right.
Certainly, they've had a lot of water under the bridge, and a lot of experience they must have gone through as well.
Thanks, Bradley. Appreciate that. Steve, what would you recommend for these clients?
To be honest, a lot of this is out of my comfort zone or expertise. I'm more interested if I can helping Nick in getting the staff morale back up and running, and also negotiating and discussing, because the morale is low because of uncertainty. And that always comes into the fact as a factor of uncertainty. So if he negotiates a good deal with the landlord going forward, and in my experience so far over the last 9 months, where I've had 2 or 3 times been in a Zoom meeting, not only with a client, but with the landlord as well, so I can reassure the landlord of the business going forward as a success. They're quite amicable to listen to a reasonable proposal moving forward, in a rent holiday or whatever it may bring. So that's really my thing, is I'll be working closely with Nick.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got a client who's got a few rental properties, and he started negotiating with his tenants at the start of lockdown 1 to make sure. And I said, well, okay, well, they still need to pay you. He went, yeah, but Chris, this is long term for me. If I do the right thing and make the arrangements and build that relationship of trust, and they've always been good tenants, I know it's sort of quite quaint, but I still believe in kindness in business and doing the right thing, and hopefully that builds a relationship longer term. And certainly having that conversation, even if it's, even if you haven't got a landlord who's like that, is worthwhile, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. But moving forward, and I think Toby mentioned, or a few people mentioned about a business plan moving forward. So, that has to come into your equation, definitely.
I suppose the other thing for Nick, looking at Nick's business, is we don't know anything about the money he owes over and above the rent. And that would be, it's interesting. He's got the 208k in the bank. We don't know what impact that's going to make to any sort of bankruptcy or insolvency, do we?
Well, I can tell you that a licensed insolvency practitioner will be rubbing their hands with 200 grand sitting in the bank. Yeah,
it's fine. That's unusual, right?
Yeah, that is very unusual.
But
I've got another client. Sorry, Chris. I've got someone that maybe one of your panel could help me with. I've got a meeting at 4:30 with someone who I've been working with, getting a statement of business together and so forth. But we've got a problem with a funding circle loan. Now, I haven't come across a funding circle loan previously. Now, when I speak to the client again, he hasn't even sent me a copy of this loan agreement or anything like that. But it's a company loan. But I need to establish, first of all, if there's any personal guarantees. But funding circle loan is like any other loan, isn't it? As far as I know.
What I would say about funding circle is, in my experience, they're aggressive.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, they're the front of the British Business Bank effectively, and as Demi says, they run to the letter of the contract because they've got their own reputation behind it back to the British Business Bank. So.
Well, as long as there's no personal guarantee, sod them. If we want to wind up the company, there'll be a creditor like anyone else.
They're probably quite careful in terms of their structures.
Yeah.
I'd probably be going in there fearing the worst if I were you, and if it's not, it's not.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, it's not normally loans secured on like property assets.
No.
It's not a mortgage, so it's whether that personal guarantee's in place is the bit you need to check. But worth doing. Demi, talk to me about sort of how you'd consider solutions for this client.
Well, it's difficult. I've just drawn a little thing in front of me, and I've started by saying, repeating a little bit what I've said before, but a review of where they are, trying to establish whether they as individuals, all three of them in fact, are on solid ground, comfortable with where they are, or if they're not, then seek to address putting that right, rather than build any kind of plan or aspiration on something they're not really feeling.
Yeah. I suppose it's that ladder up the wall one, isn't it? Have we got the ladder up the right wall and before we even start?
Absolutely. So we then come to the vision and the end in mind, based on them being in a comfortable spot. Let's take forward what that looks like. People have spoken about a 5-year, 10-year. Well, it depends, but anyway, a time frame that they're feeling comfortable meets their vision or accords with their vision. And then, of course, you're looking at where the business plan fits in. And then the external factors, I described it as this avalanche, but that's made up of technology, Brexit, the economy and COVID recovery, and market customer habits, which are changing all the time. People said it's constant change of flux, but I think we are seeing. So doing a SWOT analysis on their business plan and saying, can it withstand? Do you need to plan ahead? For example, it's not that clear how much Peter has actually invested in his business, because he's tried to do everything in terms of outsourcing and keep things to a minimum. And it may be that to meet some of the challenges, he has got to start investing in his business.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of shape I would start to, and then specific things like why has why is there 280,000 or 260,000, 280,000 in Nick's bank? Is that an effective use of capital? Should he be trying to extract that? You know, what's his pension planning, his tax planning around that? They're obviously central things to what you and I would do.
But the interesting thing there, Dan, is we can't do any of that until we know what the plan is, right? So
yeah.
So it's interesting. The conversation I had this morning about the trust said, well, where do I invest the money? I said, well, I can't answer that until we know what the IHT liability is, because you might need the cash. So we don't talk about investing until we know where we are with the other component parts.
Exactly, very much so.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Sharon, just talk to me, because and again, I didn't expect this to be a sort of where the conversation went, funny enough. But talk to me about working with the Fultses, how you work with the Fultses, and sort of how that came about and why you do it.
Okay, so basically, I've signed the Armed Forces Covenant, which basically says that I commit to support Forces families and Forces businesses as they set up businesses. So signing the Armed Forces Covenant, you can pick effectively what bits you choose to support them on. Some people say that you can offer them jobs, and that's not something I've been able to do. What I've said is that any businesses I take on, a percentage of the first year's profits will be donated to a charity of their choice. And they obviously get reduced rates on I have standard rates, but they get reduced rates on those for the first 2 years of their businesses, just to get them up and running.
And is that part of the deal? Is that part of
yeah. But everybody can decide effectively their own covenant and what they can offer for ex-forces. Why do I do it? It's a bit of a personal story. So very long story short, my uncle was in the forces, came out, and my grandmother used to say he had a cannonball for a head because he really was a wrecking ball when he came out. He came out at a time where there was very little support for guys coming out of the forces. He was a career soldier. He had no direction. He struggled getting on with his family. They had 6 kids, and he really struggled getting back into family life. The kids, I say, disassociated with him. It was because he was just so much hard work. He ended up getting divorced, then he remarried her, then he got divorced again. It was just one disaster after another. And I watched my poor grandmother just go through hell with him, pouring money into this black hole that there was no return on investment for her.
But then I suppose the other factor is PTSD, isn't it? And the fact that it wasn't talked about as much as it is now.
Absolutely. And there was, when he came out, there wasn't a great deal of support. So the impact that he had on the family, my grandmother lived with her sister. My grandmother was 89 at the time. My aunt was 93. My grandmother passed away. Aunt moved in with us and took a phone call from my uncle one day, and he'd been diagnosed with a brain tumor. And her response to this, because of the way he had been, is, well, what did the hospital say? And he said, well, they told me I'm dying. And she said, wait for it, you're not going to like this. She said, oh, good, when?
Right. Yeah, families are interesting, right, Sarah?
Absolutely, but everybody had watched literally the nightmare they did put everybody through, and seeing an end to it, I suppose for her was a bit of a release in a way, but it's tough. So
looking back at it, do you think there was an element of being in the forces that created some of those challenges?
100%, because he just couldn't get back into normal life. It just, his routine, everything was gone. The camaraderie, the people that he deemed as his friends had all gone in their different directions. Some were still serving, some weren't. It was just such a mess.
Yeah. So thank Sharon. I really, really appreciate you sharing that story. Friday, well, Steve, thank you, mate. If you need to go, you need to go. It's fine. Friday, talk to me about your experience working with forces.
A mixed bag. It's like I said, I've dealt with high-ranking officers, so it's a bit of a different dynamics. But I understand where Sharon is coming from, particularly the low-ranking officers. It is very, very difficult for them to resettle into civilian life because of the structure, the order, the regimentation that they've come to. you know, from the time they get up to the time they sort of retire in the barracks. When they come out in the open world, it's very different, and it is hard work. I have spoken to supporting the low-ranking officers with the high-ranking officers, and some of them don't actually have a sympathy. For them, the army was there to really train them, you know, to become resilient. And if they're not able to do that, then it's their fault. So it comes down to, you know, Sharon and the likes of us to look after these guys at a lower level and then ease them into it, because they have got learned skills, you know, the discipline. The only thing is they have to learn to make their own decisions.
I suppose there's an element of unlearning as well, isn't there? You know, this is the way it's always been done, but how do you navigate a world where the options are unlimited now, really?
It is. I don't know if you remember Dave Allen. He had this little clip there of a very disciplined little unit out in the front field, and the commanding officer gets shot, and these guys are walking around like these clockwork rabbits. They don't know what to do because there's nobody there to tell them what to do. So I think there are some supports available. I know some of the veterans who have gone down to the level of help the heroes and, you know, signing up covenant like Sharon has done. I've had experience of talking at the British Legion, and I've met people there, you know, from different levels of you know, offices they had. And it is a reality. Some of them are struggling. They don't know who to turn to because sometimes there's no support within the community to help. And what Sharon was describing is some of these people have got this cannonball over their head. It's very difficult to crack. And it is a very disruptive element, you know, where there are good intentioned people trying to help. But, you know, there are ways of doing it because, you know, when you get them into a space where they're not panicking, they haven't got too many things worrying in their head, and then slow down the thinking process. That's when you really get down to core of how to navigate out of their system into something a better place. And
Sharon, last one for you before we wrap up. In terms of the Armed Forces Covenant, is that available to any professional services business, any business? How does it work?
Absolutely. Anybody can sign the Armed Forces Covenant. And if anybody's interested, I can put you in touch with somebody who can arrange that for you. It's so simple. They've got a standard document. You amend it to what you want it to be, and you submit it to them, and they pop that up on their Armed Forces Covenant. Effectively, it's a website where it goes.
Yeah, I've already kind of booked in a slot with Sharon to talk about it. So.
There's also people, if people are interested in supporting forces businesses, there's something called the Hub, where you can effectively put your details in to mentor businesses, to just give them some support. So that could be anything from supporting them with a business plan. It really could be anything, just to help them get started.
Yeah, and it's knowing that support's there, isn't it? You know, that's probably the missing bit. Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much. And I know we're due to go on to 3, but I think we've come to an actual end. Next in a circle, as per usual, it will be on LinkedIn and everywhere on the website, and we'll post it on H&B, Avery Means Business as well. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to go and make myself a cup of tea and potentially a 10-minute nap after me preparing for my next meeting. Have a lovely day. I know I will speak to a lot of you soon, and see you next month.
See you all.
Thank you for your time, Chris.
Bye. See you.
Good to seeing you.
Bye.